Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. We look forward to hopefully a lively discussion. And work in progress, I think, is a very apt description for our project, particularly given the fact that we actually had contractors, I hope, out on the street today relocating one of our pop-up cafes that I'll be showing you later in the presentation. So definitely an active project that we're working on. So I'm talking today about the 38th Avenue corridor plan and our implementation efforts to date. 38th Avenue, obviously a major arterial in the metro area. The area in question that we're working on is the area between Wadsworth and Sheridan. So Sheridan is our eastern border shared with Denver. I'm going to give you a little background tonight on, or this morning, on the planning efforts that have occurred over the last about 3 years. Talk again about the implementation efforts to date. We think we've been fairly successful and actually taken a pretty active role in working on implementation. What we've learned, or ideas in the spirit of the event today, and the various challenges that remain that we hope to get your feedback on. So back in 2009, we adopted a citywide comprehensive plan. Pretty big effort for us today. For us, it represented really a culture change in terms of how we looked at change, and really proactive kind of embracing change in the community. Historically, Wheat Ridge has been fairly resistant to change, and so I think it was a fairly significant effort for us in terms of getting the community really on board with embracing some more active approach to change. 38th Avenue was identified as a main street, which is a theme that you hear frequently, certainly before 2009. Lots of people identify with 38th Avenue as a main street. And actually, historically, if you look at photos, it looked a lot like a main street before we widened it into 4 and 5 lanes. It actually had, historically, back in the turn of the century, general stores and buildings built up to the street. So we're really kind of going back to our roots, obviously, from a long time ago. And very little of that remains, though. So we really are starting from scratch in a lot of ways. It was identified as one of our priority corridors. We had 5 priority corridors that were identified in that planning document, and 38th Avenue was certainly one of them. Continuing on, Wheat Ridge 2020 and the city, and I'll talk more about who Wheat Ridge 2020 is a little later, but we approached DOLA and DCI to jointly host an event where we got about, I think, close to 100, maybe closer to 80 people to really have an intensive kind of planning charrette on 38th Avenue. And again, this idea of establishing a better vision for it as a main street was a recurring theme. And at that time, it was also when the idea of a road diet, or actually a narrowing of the street or a reducing of the vehicular capacity of the street, came up as a topic and really got some traction, that people thought that might be a really interesting approach to how we could change the character of 38th Avenue. With that, and based on the recommendations from that DCI and DOLA planning effort, which was real quick, not detailed at all, it was clear that we had to go through the effort of adopting a corridor plan and really clarifying that vision, and very importantly, studying whether it was feasible to put the street on what we call a road diet and reducing the vehicular capacity. It was very critical to have that traffic study to back up that if we were going to narrow the capacity and understand what that would do to other streets and what it would do to congestion and level of service on 38th Avenue itself. We really wanted a concrete strategy for how you achieve revitalization, and that's why the implementation discussion that we'll have today was so critical, we knew, as we developed the plan. It was adopted, not unanimously, I would note, but on October 10th in 2011 by City Council. And I'm remiss in thanking Councilwoman Jay for being here today, and for your ongoing support of our efforts on 38th Avenue. You've been a great support. She was actually in a video, starring role in a video on how to do back-in angle parking, and is very photogenic in that, and also quite a talented back-in parker. Next, I'm going to go over some of the major plan recommendations in this 38th Avenue corridor plan. This is a graphic, kind of a land use graphic from the corridor plan. I don't know if, yeah. Previously, we've on the Wadsworth corridor between 35th and 44th, that's been identified as a potential town center, kind of more of a mixed-use corridor for the city. We've been successful in achieving some of that. It's obviously infill development, but we've got a 4-story senior housing project that's an urban renewal project that's going in at 44th and Wadsworth. The redevelopment of 38th and Wadsworth is really critical to kind of anchoring those two ends of Wadsworth as a town center of sorts. The ideas that came out of the corridor plan was, a logical extension of that town center was really focusing this as kind of the primary commercial main street. So this portion of 38th Avenue and here is Wadsworth, and then on the other end is Sheridan. So this is an area where we're really focused on right now in terms of defining this as more of a commercial main street. And there was already the semblance of that in place in terms of some buildings being more oriented to the street, having on-street parking. Yes, sir.
Ken, you can ask to save questions at the end, but as you define downtown Wheat Ridge, how did you end up in either your comp plan or otherwise actually defining the boundaries for the downtown?
It was really not in the comp plan effort. It was really as part of the corridor plan that we kind of added one and one together and got maybe three. But is that if we've got a main street, if we know this is a town center, I mean, does this start to feel like a downtown Wheat Ridge? So it wasn't a very scientific effort in terms of defining the boundaries, other than Pierce is a fairly major north-south street. And that seemed a logical kind of termination on the east. And of course, Wadsworth is somewhat of a barrier, but wanted to capture areas on the other side of Wadsworth as well. So that's kind of how we came up with that definition. And again, 44th and 35th were already defined as the north and south boundaries of the town center from previous planning efforts on Wadsworth. There was an understanding that it wasn't realistic to take a 1.5-mile corridor and turn it all into a kind of a walkable main street, one kind of district. So we tried to divide it up into logical segments. So moving to the east, creating more of a residential sub-district, again, still kind of a main street feel in terms of how the buildings, urban design elements and street elements, but more of a residential focus. There's already some significant residential there. There's a 11-story senior housing project that also has some other 3 to 4-story buildings as well. So there's already the semblance of that residential district. And then moving further east, the Sheridan commercial corridor is already fairly well established with retail uses, so don't necessarily see a lot of change occurring in that area. We've already several years ago built some streetscape improvements in that area, and we like those and don't expect things to change there. The recommendations in the plan in terms of the revitalization are really focused in these 3 areas: the roadway, land use, urban design, and economic development. I'll talk just a little bit about each of those. Some of the urban design recommendations and land use recommendations, rezoning of the corridor. As you probably can imagine, there's a real mix of commercial and residential zonings on the corridor. Currently, we had gone through the effort in 2010 of developing new mixed-use zoning districts, and one of them was really tailored towards this. It's a mixed-use neighborhood zone district, and we felt it would be important to pursue that rezoning, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Defining the streetscape design, what exactly does the street look like, and the interface between the back of curb and the built environment. Obviously, we need to encourage infill development. I mean, that's really what we're all about in Wheat Ridge. There's really no green fields or vacant land. A concept of a civic center also emerged. There's certainly plenty of good examples in the metro area of downtowns or redevelopments that have been anchored by civic uses of some sort. Not necessarily a city hall. Could be other facilities such as a library. There's already a major Jefferson County school facility on 38th Avenue, and we felt there was an opportunity to leverage that location on 38th in that Main Street district. And another theme that emerged was it was very important in people's minds, and we agree, that parking reservoirs be created so that there's adequate parking for the commercial and residential development. Here's a kind of a bird's eye view of that civic center concept. 38th Avenue here, we're just east of Wadsworth. Wadsworth would be on this side of the screen. Upham Street, there's a fire district office here. This is the existing middle school and beyond that is actually an elementary school as well. One of our most successful businesses, and certainly an iconic business that we hope you all have visited, is Wheat Ridge Cyclery. They actually did an expansion a few years ago, and we helped fund that through our Urban Renewal Authority as well. So great store, great destination that we feel like we can leverage as well. So some undeveloped land in this area, or very lightly developed land. So that's where you start to see the possibility that we can introduce these civic uses. There's quite a bit of vacant ground in the front up here. This is school property. There's a parking lot and then kind of a nice lawn area, but really a significant opportunity to potentially partner with the school district, and those discussions are ongoing in some sort of a redevelopment, whether it be this, which is more of a mixed-use development, or actually having some of the civic component on that school land. So we are continuing those discussions as we speak. In terms of economic development, one of the recommendations that was loud and clear from the planning process is that we needed on the street grassroots leadership. The business community, the residential community, several people that were introduced today are active in participating on the leadership committee, which is meeting since January of this year, several times a month typically. One of their chief efforts that they've been working on is a marketing and branding strategy. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well, but we've made a lot of progress in terms of defining a brand identity for 38th Avenue that brings some cohesion to the corridor, we hope, and we're working on a marketing plan that will implement that over the short term and the long term. Promotional materials are part of that, and again, that's all in the works and more to come later this year. A land assembly strategy was another recommendation from an economic development perspective, that you really need to know how you're going to approach, from the public side or from the private side, land assembly, because Wheat Ridge, like many communities of its age, I suppose, is really parceled up. I mean, we don't have a lot of large standalone parcels. So if you really want to see kind of transformative change on 38th Avenue, hopefully you can get some assembly to occur so that you're not looking at just simply a small site-by-site redevelopment. Business retention plan was another recommendation in terms of economic development. And finally a grant and loan program. We already have a couple active grant programs and loan programs. Some of those are administered by the Wheat Ridge Business District, which is staffed by Wheat Ridge 2020. So just to continue those and enhance those, and actually Wheat Ridge 2020, who I should note is I guess they're not represented here today, but they're a nonprofit that the city supports. It's a community and economic development organization that really works at a grassroots level in the city on both housing redevelopment and commercial redevelopment. So they're a real important partner, and they've been around since 2005. So they staff that grant program, and they've actually applied to the city, but for additional funding this year to be able to enhance that on 38th Avenue. Yes.
Ken, with regard the business retention, what came out of the business retention is all businesses are good, or was there some selection as to which businesses to be more actively working to retain?
Probably yes and no on that. I think there's certainly no intention to drive existing businesses out. I think there was some perception that some of the existing businesses which are more auto-oriented felt threatened, whether they be automotive service or just car dependent in terms of their typical clientele. That's certainly not the intent, and which is why the understanding that the traffic was going to work if we did a road diet was so important. But having said that, I think we're trying to create a walkable street environment. The types of uses that we think would support that tend to be more retail, restaurant oriented, and that's we don't have our loan programs or our grant programs structured to only get those types of uses yet, but we're considering that. So whether we would incentivize those types of uses through a grant and loan program, but not discourage other types of uses in terms of general business retention, we certainly want to retain all businesses in town. So in terms of the roadway design, which is certainly an interesting part of this project, we think, why would we even consider a road diet? And certainly some people would still say, why would you even consider a road diet? And they'd say it quite vehemently. When you look at 38th Avenue, it carries between about 16 and 18,000 trips a day, and has for years. The traffic hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down in any significant way or any significant trend. So it's really kind of on that cusp of how much lane capacity do you need. I mean, I think I'm no traffic engineer, but I see only one maybe in the audience, so I can maybe bluff it. But 18 to 20,000 trips a day is kind of a typical capacity for a two-lane street, or a two-lane with at least maybe a shared turn lane, which is what we ended up with. So we knew it was designed to carry more than it actually does. We wanted a more pedestrian-friendly street, obviously. We thought that it could actually be a safer street, and we feel that it is. And of course, ultimately, everything that we're trying to achieve is to be economically successful on 38th Avenue. So we conducted a very detailed traffic analysis, both looking at the functionality of 38th if we were to go to a three-lane road section, but also what it would do in terms of diversion traffic. And I won't talk in detail about the results from that study, but suffice it to say what it told us was two things. Number one, you could do a two-lane with a center turn lane road section on 38th Avenue, not quite all the way to Wadsworth and Sheridan, which is not unexpected. So Sheridan and Wadsworth, we don't go quite that far. We have to transition from the 4 and 5 lane section into the 3-lane section. The second thing it told us, and the level of service and the total travel time for that section from Wadsworth to Sheridan remain very similar. Not the same. I mean, there is more congestion and certainly more perceived congestion, but the level of service, with the exception of some turning movements at some of the major intersections, was going to stay the same. The second thing the study told us was that there would be little to no diversion traffic, that some of the parallel facilities that you may or may not want additional traffic to go to, 44th, 35th, 32nd, that there wasn't going to be really anything but negligible diversion to those streets because there just wasn't travel time savings. So not that there wouldn't be some, but not so significant that we were concerned. So based on that traffic analysis, what we then decided to do was develop some street sections. What could we do? And the idea was, what could we do in the existing curb to curb? What could we actually retrofit in the short term? We heard loud and clear through the planning process that people are sick of just talking about 38th Avenue. Again, it has that history of being a main street. It means a lot to the community in a variety of ways. So we wanted some sort of a short-term plan for how we could use the existing curb-to-curb without a significant capital expenditure to achieve that road diet and that different feel for 38th Avenue. So this is the road section that we came up with, kind of a typical road section as we've actually implemented it. Of course, it varies a little bit from area to area, but identified one through lane in each direction, a shared center turn lane, and then on one side of the street we were able to create parking and what we're calling a temporary amenity zone, and I'll show you what those look like here in a moment. The long-term goal is to actually reconstruct the street and achieve a more typical road section, you might say, in terms of having this landscape or amenity zone, a somewhat wider walk on both sides of the street. So this is the long-term goal. We're not quite there yet. We're in this what we call pilot project stage of restriping the street and repurposing it for a short-term test period. So implementation efforts. Again, the plan was adopted in October, so not quite a year ago. The leadership committee has been a big part of the implementation since then. As I mentioned, they've been meeting very actively. The branding and marketing has been their kind of chief task in the short term, and they've been doing a great job of managing that. And then, of course, the short-term road diet. Mixed-use zoning, we're making progress on as well, and I'll talk to that a little bit more. So again, the leadership committee is staffed by the Wheat Ridge 2020 organization. We've provided funding, City Council provided funding to Wheat Ridge 2020 to support that leadership committee effort. Again, they've been meeting very actively once or twice a month, and having, it varies of course, but having between about 20 and up to maybe 35 people that have been attending those events. It's a mix of residents and businesses. We We want as many businesses as there as we can, obviously, because we really feel like the longevity of this project is only going to be achieved if we have that grassroots on the street vested interest in the success of the project. Again, their leading effort to create the brand, I'll show you a little bit about that, and the marketing strategy. Centro is the firm that we've been using to manage that. And they're planning a special event, and the first one has been set. It's in the final stages of being organized in terms of the format, but it's an all-day event on September 22nd, focused in that Main Street area at 38th and High Court, so right across and adjacent to Wheat Ridge Cyclery. So it should be a good event. This is our branding at this point. It's very softly been released right now, but the ridge at 38 was the clear consensus of what everyone wanted to brand 38th Ave. Kind of, I'm not a marketing person, but the idea is this retro with a fresh twist, and one of the slogans or taglines that they'll be using is "Look Closer," and I think "Look Closer" kind of has maybe two meanings. Number one, look closer. Number one, we've slowed down traffic and you have an opportunity to look and see what you're driving by. There's actually some pretty cool businesses and things that are already going on 38th Avenue. And then also, I think, kind of the live local movement, just look closer in general and shop local, and that's a real theme that's we're trying to celebrate. And there's that event, Celebrate Ridge at 38, which is on Saturday, September 22nd. Here's a few of the ideas that are coming out of the marketing plan in terms of how we would communicate graphically those taglines. And some more there too. Again, look, live, be closer, trying to embrace that kind of live local theme in the marketing and branding. So the road diet, I'll show you a few slides of this. It's a pilot project, as I mentioned. We've kind of said that we're testing it for about 12 to 24 months. We've restriped the road from Upham to Depew into a 3-lane section, one through lane, and then one through lane in each direction, and a shared center turn lane. We did need to keep right turn lanes at key intersections from the traffic analysis. We're doing something quite unique in that Main Street district in the Upham to Pierce area. We had a wider curb-to-curb section there, just historically, so we were able to do a little more than what I showed you in that previous section. We were able to add back-in angle parking, which was kind of cutting edge, we felt, but since it's a pilot project, we felt like we had a pretty wide, we could do a lot more under that umbrella. And we also did a bike lane. It's probably one of the shorter bike lanes in the metro area, or in the it's only a few blocks, about 5 blocks, but it ties in a north-south bike route on Pierce Avenue, and it gets you over to Upham Street, which is a nice biking street as well that kind of diverts you from Wadsworth. So we felt it was a logical area to have a bike lane, and again, it was a pilot project, so we thought it was worth trying. And again, that really defines our Main Street district. I'll show you these pop-up cafes, but we've actually repurposed in the street in several areas, 3 areas, with an actual outdoor cafe area that is temporary. It's mobile. As I mentioned, there's one on the move today to go to a better location. And then we've also added landscape planners that are out in the right-of-way, inside of the curb, trying to define that restriped area with not just striping, but with some actual physical improvements, and start to get a feel for how it would actually feel as a street if you reconstructed it and added permanent landscaping and amenities in that area. So I'll give you a few before and afters. It's a view towards closer to Sheridan. This gives you the view. You can see the restriping with a center turn lane, one through lane, and then a parking lane here. You can see in the distance there, the parking is getting some use, and these are an example of the planners that we've put in several locations. Again, another view of the before and the after. This is what we're calling an access control or a curb cut consolidation that this property owner took us up on. So we've we've added these to define a new parking area. It actually made for a more efficient parking lot for them, and again starts to add some amenities along the street to make it feel like a nicer walkable environment. Another before, this is a good before. Thanks Sarah for this slide. I should mention that Sarah is really hopefully will be an active part of the discussion, because she's really been the project manager on this and spends the majority of her days working on 38th Avenue. We've actually have a new business here. So Muchili Shoes opened a second location. So a few things going on in this slide. You see that back in angle parking. You see some bike racks that we've added, and of course the new business. This is another view of the street where we've added a pop-up cafe and Wheat Ridge Cyclery in the background. There's the pop-up cafe. It's great space. It gets used a ton. This is adjacent to a new business as well. Right Coast Pizza has been open for several months now, but they actually have a license to serve booze out there, and it gets a lot of use. Again, just one more view of the street. You can see that the on-street parking, to our surprise to some extent, is getting some use in all areas, and the bike lane does get use. These are some existing planners that we repurposed, added some art to them, and the art panels have been sponsored by businesses, so a good way to get those businesses involved. The mixed-use rezoning, the city actually initiated that with the kind of general support of the property owners. I mentioned about 90% in some of our surveys. I think it was 87% indicated support for the city initiating a rezoning. We have public hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council scheduled. I think the notice for those just went out earlier this week, or this week, September and October for the Planning Commission and City Council. So it's a real flexible zone district in terms of uses. It's pretty much form-based, though not strictly a form-based code. And very importantly, in terms of encouraging development, once you're rezoned to mixed use, by and large, you have all administrative review and approval through a site plan process. So in conclusion, just a few things of what we've learned, and then some questions or challenges that we think remain. It's still certainly early. We're going to take our initial traffic counts in September, October. We had originally planned to wait until the spring, but I think there's a lot of interest in seeing how things are functioning. So we'll be taking traffic counts in September, October of this year. It seems to be functioning as predicted, which again doesn't mean that there's not more congestion and more perceived congestion, because we have forced 2 lanes into one. But it's moving, and it really is functioning based on our travel time analysis that we've done so far, as predicted in the study. Again, anecdotally, certainly slower speeds. The posted speed limit's 35. I think people are generally driving that now. Previously, we clocked kind of average speeds of about 45. So we've been successful in slowing people down. And there's definitely more bike ped activity. Visually, we're going to again be counting those numbers as well. So, it is possible to kind of do this retrofitting suburbia and create a more urban environment in suburban areas. We're still in the test period, though. The partnerships, I've mentioned Wheat Ridge 2020. There's a few people from Live Well Wheat Ridge here. They've been a great advocate for active living, healthy eating, obviously, is their mission, but they really see that in Wheat Ridge realized on 38th Avenue. So they're very actively engaged, and I think really brings the community to back up this planning effort. They were just out on the street on Tuesday to do an audit, a walking audit of 38th Avenue, and I think that sounded like that was a great success. A couple dozen people came out and reviewed how well or how it isn't functioning well. So it's a great effort that they've done in a couple locations in the city previously and continued. And then, of course, the property business owners. I can't emphasize that enough, how critical they're going to be for the long-term success of the corridor. Similar, we feel a multi-pronged approach is critical. It's not just about the street design. We've got to get the regulatory environment to align from a zoning perspective, the branding, critical. Each of these are, I think, equally critical economic incentives, and really a strategy for how you're going to transform real estate. And I love to highlight this, but just in 2012, 14 new businesses have located on 38th Avenue. And in the years prior, kind of in anticipation of what people knew to be in the works, there were also a number of other businesses that aren't in that 14 that relocated to the corridor. So what we still need help figuring out, we've got a bunch of metrics that we've identified in terms of evaluating the project over the next 24 months. Economic success in terms of sales tax generation, businesses that have opened, and of course the transportation metrics are important too. How is traffic moving? How much traffic did you divert to other streets that maybe you don't want it diverted to? It's very, it's not everyone's happy, as you can imagine, and that's something that we continue to need to manage very actively. I think it's easy for the naysayers to kind of take over and dominate the stage, and I think it's important to have our elected officials, staff, and the supporters kind of aligned and really actively saying, what we're doing and what the end game is, which again is really a dynamic and economically successful corridor. People like to kind of tag on to the road diet and complain about the fact that it feels slower. Well, it is slower a little bit. So we need to kind of spin that back. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's not just about the road diet. It's about a lot of other things. I think the big issue is how do you actually implement this in a permanent way? How do you pay for that? What's the funding source? And how do you get political support? It's likely going to be something that would have to be voted upon as part of a bond measure, perhaps. Just one idea. And it's one of those things that it's very, I'm calling it soft infrastructure. I mean, it's pretty stuff. It's not a road expansion, which may be easier to get funded. The Civic Center, we think that's a great idea. We've actually got some things in the hopper about potential uses that might go in there. But we're, I guess, curious to see what other successful models there are for kind of partnership with other entities, not just the City Hall, but other educational organizations or other cultural facilities that might become anchor uses. We feel it's very critical to identify a self-sustaining organizational structure. So this leadership committee is very ad hoc right now, but what does that look like in the future? How do they get more organized formally and support themselves in terms of marketing, branding, etc. And then another challenge that is not unique to 38th Avenue, but just the overall market conditions. The demographics on the corridor for a national retailer, for instance, that would come in and look aren't necessarily great. The real estate market generally, commercial-wise, is still somewhat soft for a corridor like this. So how can you incentivize people to come? What are the best incentives that would get people to come to 38th Avenue? You have an answer?
No. Always questions, Ken. Questions for understanding. You mentioned the soft side of trying to, or as you develop support, recognizing you're not necessarily one of those folks that have to go up for election, so maybe you could talk a little bit about the soft side was dealt with in Wheat Ridge.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood.
The soft side of gaining the community and business support, and how that was garnered. What was the process? Yeah,
a lot of time spent on the street between Britta Fisher, the executive director of Wheat Ridge 2020, and Sarah in terms of adoption of the plan and really meeting one-on-one in people's businesses over the course of several months was really how we built that support up and built that trust up to the extent that we could. Again, not everyone's on board, but with just face-to-face conversations in people's businesses. Well, that's all my comments. I thank you for your time and look forward to the discussion.